This week on London Real, we have the 2016 U.S. presidential candidate for the Transhumanist Party, Zoltan Istvan.
The primary goal of transhumanism is to try to overcome biological death. My platform is very much to try to change the national conversation, to talk about designer babies, to talk about how is the military going to handle artificial intelligence. If a robotic arm comes onto the market and it's better than my arm, I'm going to electively get it. A human might end up being like we see an ant now, you know? I mean, we'll look at a human experience and be, wow, that was so trivial.
The beauty of being human is making those mistakes.
Oh, making those mistakes.
Right? Your body failing in a tragic moment, or someone getting hit by lightning, or having a massive coronary, and it reminds us that we're mortal, and then we make changes, and you know what I mean? These are all engineered into the human equation, aren't they? And you're talking about engineering those things out.
On Sunday, London Real presents Zoltan Istvan, Transhumanist.
It's common sense. Transhumanism is just plain common sense.
London Real Academy. Build the best you.
When I go in and look at a person or a business, I want to hear him talk about his dreams.
Am I living in alignment to the way I want to be living? And there's a feeling you get if you're not.
A community of action-oriented people that will keep you accountable to your goals. Sign up now for a free 30-day trial. London Real, sponsored by Bulletproof. You know, it's not very often that I get to interview one of the USA presidential candidates for 2016 in my studio at London Real, but you know, these things happen. Crazy things happen at London Real, and this is Mr. Zoltan Istvan, and he is the candidate for the Transhumanist Party. And if you don't know what that means, well, it's time to get on board, because they talk about a lot of the issues that are going to face us in the future, and that's really about the singularity, where technology and being human almost becomes one. And there's a lot of issues surrounding that whole occurrence, and our current political parties and a lot of our religious ideas just don't really give us the chance to address it. And so Zoltan is all about doing that. He's actually a really incredible guy, super talented, former entrepreneur that's really taken this part of his life now to really focus on transhumanism and being the party's presidential candidate. I don't think he realistically thinks he has a chance of winning because of all the fundraising, etc., but he's gonna go in his tour bus and give it a good try. I think Vice Magazine's gonna be following him around, and I just had a really good time talking to him. He's a really intelligent guy, and he explains things like cyborg rights and things that I hadn't have even thought about, not to mention a lot of engineering and a lot of issues we have when we start being able to extend our lives, maybe even forever. You know, he's really down with that whole idea that even Dr. Aubrey de Grey talked about as far as extending your life for a very long time. So I hope you enjoy Zoltan. It was a special time with him, and like I said, he's truly fascinating, even outside of his presidential run or the transhumanist aspects, and it'll really get you to really think about how we are going to deal with the fact that we really are becoming almost pieces of biotechnology. I'm guessing right now your smartphone is within reaching distance of you right now. Pretty soon it'll be inside of your body. So something to think about, and I hope you enjoy this show. And if you're watching this, I'm guessing it's happening probably on the London Real Academy, where you can watch our full entire episodes with no breaks, no pop-ups. All you do is sign in with your social media. But there's a lot more going on behind the scenes, because you'll see there's an entire academy that's only available to our founding 500 members, and it's just a group of people all around the world that want to make themselves better. And we do it through keeping each other accountable and taking action with our lives. We do it out of love, respect. We're vulnerable all the time, and we also like to have fun. And I've just pretty much rattled off the 5 rules of the Academy, and there's just so many great things happening. I'm so impressed with the people in there. And you also get an amazing amount of content, including the success secrets of Zoltan from this episode, which you can only get as a premium member. You also get live shows, so you could have watched this one live. You also get footage from our live events like Dan Pena live at the Ritz, and you get access to our webinars, our live meetups at the studio every week, and you can DM me anytime you want with your questions. And you can get access to that right now within 30 seconds. And on top of that, you have a 30-day money-back, risk-free guarantee. If for some reason you're not 120% satisfied after 30 days, we'll give you your money back. There's no worries, no question asked. So there's really no excuse to come in here and check it out. I'm telling you, the vibe is amazing. The activity feed alone of all of the social media happening is just so inspiring. Every day I go in there and people just, they make my jaw drop because there's so much cool stuff happening. So please join us, become a member of the tribe now. Check it out for 30 days for free. It's super easy, and it's just actually, I think it's going to change your life. It's changing mine as we speak. So there you go. Now I will leave you with Mr. Zoltan Istvan, Transhumanist Party presidential candidate for 2016. London Real Set Design by Timothy Olton. This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Zoltan Istvan, who is the founder and 2016 U.S. presidential candidate of the Transhumanist Party, a political organization dedicated to putting science, health, and technology at the forefront of American politics. Zoltan, you've explored over 100 countries, many as a journalist for the National Geographic Channel. You write for Wired UK, Psychology Today, and Vice's Motherboard. Welcome, finally, to London Real.
Thanks so much for having me, Brian. I appreciate it.
No, it's great to have you on. I've been watching you, over the last year. You had a fantastic show on Joe Rogan. I hear now that you've just broken out on Good Mythical Morning. My stepdaughter will now be super excited about that. You're running for president this year. So many exciting things happening. I want to jump in and really talk about transhumanism because I don't think everyone understands it, including myself. But there was something that you wrote to me kind of in our pre-interview, and it always gives me ideas about people, and I think it might tell people a little bit more about you. And I was wondering if you could tell me about that time in Vietnam when you were over there for the National Geographic Channel, and you said you almost stepped on a landmine, and you said for 4 years you had been covering conflict zones, and you just finally got tired with almost dying. And when I read that, I was just like, I can kind of understand what you meant. And you said that really changed you. You went home to America and you really started kind of on this journey of yours, I think, for transhumanism. Can you walk me through kind of what that happened and if that did influence what you're doing now?
Sure. So I have, always been interested in science fiction and transhumanism, actually, since I've been in college. But I think, like a lot of other people, I was just not pursuing it as necessarily something of either a career or pursuing it full, with my whole heart. Later in my late 20s, I had been working with the National Geographic Channel. One of the stories I was doing, I'd been doing actually a lot of conflict zone stories. Pakistan and India, the war there was one of the...
Kashmir, you covered that war.
Yeah, and there was, I saw a lot of bad stuff, really. I got home and left some pretty heavy scars on me. But a story after that I was doing was in Vietnam, where on bomb diggers, and there's an entire maybe 10 or 20,000 farmers who have given up farming, and they now collect unexploded bombs that America dropped 30, 40 years ago, or 50 years ago on the country, and they sell the metal. The problem is that most of the work is in the demilitarized zone where there's a ton of landmines, and it's an incredibly dangerous work. As a result, you have about a 10 or 15% chance of losing a leg or losing your life by being blown up from a landmine over a period of a couple years of doing this type of work. Very high risk work. So I was there filming this story for the National Geographic Channel, and after 1 week of filming the story, I was just totally a bundle of nerves because you can't cover this story and not worry about yourself stepping on landmines. And on one of the final days that I was filming, my guide from behind me came, pushed and tackled me down to the ground and said, look. And lo and behold, in the ground, there was this half-buried black object. And we looked very carefully and determined that it was a landmine, as the guide had thought. And it was just after 4 years of covering a lot of conflict zones and after a week of just worrying about landmines that I was sort of just through with anything dangerous. And I was also through with this idea of dying. And that's when I really, like a kind of a philosophical bomb went off in my head where I thought, I need to do something about this problem of dying. I need to actually help the transhumanism movement. The main goal of transhumanism, or the primary goal, is to overcome death, is to overcome suffering, and through science and technology. So I thought about it, and after that story, I went home and began writing my novel, The Transhumanist Wager, which took a whole 4 years to write. And once it came out, the book did really well, and it launched my career as a futurist, and especially as a transhumanist.
Wow, that's quite a story. Is it, I hear a lot of people that cover conflicts, they do it as a rush. Is it kind of a young man's game? Is it exciting and exploration? Is that kind of how you got into that?
Yes, that's definitely it. I gotta be honest though, I think major media sends young people to conflict zones to prove themselves in the journalism world. And I think if you ask a lot of journalists that are trying to work themselves up the ladder, they have to be in some type of conflict zone to sort of make a reputation for themselves. It's sort of a, earn your badge type of thing. But the rush was one thing, and I enjoyed what I was doing. But, as I got older and I, got crossed into my 30s, started having longer term girlfriends and relationships, I wasn't so keen on going to war zones anymore or covering those kinds of conflict. I was getting older thinking, I really don't want to get hurt. I don't want to lose a leg or, a bunch of limbs. And so, even if there was something really exciting about it, and sometimes I do dream of going back and covering a great war zone. I mean, that would be wonderful in the sense of it's real journalism. But I don't know, it's certainly not something you can do for the rest of your life and also try to be a part of a family or just the normal society, because it's incredible. It takes its toll. And the things you see, the rape victims you interview. I mean, in my Kashmir story, I made a documentary called Pawns of Paradise, which was recently acquired by The Age, an Australian company. And a third of the people I interviewed out of like 30 cried or wept. And I thought, that's too much. You can't have so many people weeping. That's a tragedy. And so it's the kind of thing, like, I think a lot of people don't realize with journalists, like how heavy it is also for the journalists.
Yeah. Amber Lyon, who was on Rogan as well, who's gone on to set up Reset Me, which is a whole fantastic website, dedicated to psychedelics. But she used to cover a lot of conflict zones, and she realized that she took on a lot of that anxiety and pain. And when she finally got it out, she realized that she had, PTSD symptoms from covering wars, and it's just something you don't think about. You don't realize the journalists take it all on themselves.
Yeah, no, I definitely had those symptoms. I would get back, and it would take me 2 to 3 weeks to adjust. My girlfriends would be like, "What's wrong?" And they just didn't get it. It's just too much. But then you get over it, and you kind of go on. So there are elements of it that are really brilliant in terms of it's exciting, and mostly I think what journalists are trying to do, at least I was trying to do, was like my documentary was on a humanitarian documentary. It was on essentially on refugees, and unfortunately the refugees have some of the worst stories to be told, which is why they're refugees. So it's wonderful work to be helping them, but it definitely takes its psychological toll.
Right. So I understand that you want to get out of there and go and leave a safe life at home. And then when you're saying, well, now I really want to live forever, and then that might be one of the tenets of transhumanism, I'm guessing that's when most people say, okay, what was that, Zoltan? Because people don't necessarily understand or even accept the fact that we might be able to live forever. And for me, that's the main thing about transhumanism, which is different than other things. Can you kind of describe that idea?
Sure. So I just like to say transhumanism is an international social movement of people trying to use science and technology to radically modify or improve the human body and improve the human experience. And that could range from anything from bionic hearts to artificial limbs to cranial implants to driverless cars.
Mobile phones?
Yeah, it depends on how you look at it. I mean, some people will say transhumanism was the first time a primate picked up a rock and made an axe out of it, or a hammer. But I like to think of transhumanism more in terms of the radical science that we're just encroaching upon in our lives and in civilization right now. But certainly an iPhone, I mean, if you look back even 5 years, how dramatic it's in some of the smartphones, what it's done to society, it's very transhumanist. And I think the one thing, I'd have your audience knows that the primary goal of transhumanism is to try to overcome biological death. And there's a number of methods to do that. You can do that through either, for example, 3D printing new organs, organ failure being one of the main reasons people die. You can change your genetic structure and try to make it so you can stop aging, or you can maybe even do pretty science fiction-y things like upload yourself into a machine. There's a number of methods that transhumanists are approaching this problem of death. But they're all ways to try to essentially make it so that we don't have to die. Kind of going back to even my Vietnam experience, which is just everyone at some point, all transhumanists at some point have had a revelation saying, wow, life is so wonderful, or life is so important to me that I want to find a way to preserve that life.
It freaks a lot of people out. I'm sure religious people come to you, all sorts of other spiritual people come to you. They say, death is not the end. It's part of the process. What do you say? Do you have arguments for all these different angles that hit you?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I think when you're talking about religious people, that's such a large conundrum that transhumanists have, because first off, most of the world is still quite religious. In America especially, 85% of the people are religious. It means that they are not worried about dying as much because they're just going to die and go meet their maker and, have a perfect life. I'm an atheist. I've openly been one for a long time
Always
now.
have been?
Not always. I had a Catholic upbringing and even went to Catholic school. I actually became an atheist after I read the Bible when I was 18 years old. I decided at one point to read the Bible cover to cover, and the moment I closed the very last page, I just was done, because it just was too crazy, too much violence, too many insane things happening. I take it as wonderful literature, but I did not believe in God after that. And so,
Didn't believe in God, or didn't believe in the book?
I didn't believe in God. I didn't, because I didn't really have any other belief. But to be honest with you, I do sort of believe that there might be something else out there, and this is a little bit crazy thinking, but I'd be very surprised if there wasn't another super intelligence, an artificial intelligence that at some point in the 13.8 billion years that the universe has existed hasn't come and evolved and created other types of worlds or other types of frameworks. I've written about this recently, where I'm a kind of a believer that with almost 2 billion planets out there that are habitable potentially, at least according to scientists, there's a very strong chance other civilizations have existed or are existing right now. And it would be not a large step to say that they have already developed further than us. And we're very close to developing a superintelligence. We're only 50 years away probably from developing an artificial intelligence that is maybe 10,000 times smarter than us, if we choose to go through with it.
Do you believe it's 50? I always felt like maybe we've always thought it was 50 years away, like even 100 years ago, 200 years ago. If you look back through history, like everyone thinks we're always there. I mean, it does feel like we're 50 now, but are we?
So, I'm an optimist, and I could be wrong, but a lot more experts these days are saying that. That's, I think, the big difference, is that artificial intelligence, the whole technology field, was quite small 50 years ago. The amount of technologists on the planet was not that many. Now you have you have hundreds of millions of engineers, and I think a lot of them are suggesting that we're pretty close to it. It may not be 50, it might be 100, but either way, on a kind of a chronological scale of evolutionary development, we're at the very, very end. And that presents, I think other civilizations, if they exist, would also have been, at some point there, and could have easily be way ahead of us. So when you talk about my atheism, it's not a pure atheism. I don't think any atheist can say they absolutely know for a fact God doesn't exist. I just like to do that because I like to say I'm an atheist, because from a historical context, I feel that religion has damaged the species, has held back science. The reason we're not all living indefinitely now is because we broadly live in an anti-science culture, especially in America. That's why you had, for example, George W. Bush stop stem cell funding for 7-8 years. I consider that a tragedy. Or this is why you have For example, the Pope saying a condom's usage in Africa is wrong or sinful.
Right.
And then you have literally millions of people dying.
That was the old Pope. The new Pope is for it, right?
No, the old, he's not as against it, but he still hasn't come out 100% and said, this is okay. So there are problems with that. We really need someone to stand up and say, well, if it's in the best interest of longevity, if it's in the best interest of health, then it's in the best interest of the people.
Okay.
And that's something we have.
If we have a new world that we're going to in 50 years where there could be this kind of entity that is this artificial intelligence entity, are you kind of saying with your presidential run that our current political structure isn't ready for that, isn't ready to handle it, much like with George Bush, he wasn't able to embrace the technology that would save us? Is that kind of why you're running?
Yeah, 100%. You know, as I've explained to people before, I'm not going to win this time around, and you know, there's virtually no chance of that unless you know, a couple of billionaires put some money behind me right now.
Is that okay to say to your followers, or are you
No,
supposed to go in and say we're
no,
win?
I'm not. I don't want to lie to anyone
Okay.
because I have too many journalists covering me, and I have to remain, you know, realistic.
And it's a money machine, isn't it?
Oh,
Money
it's
for politics.
so sad. It's very upsetting. But yes, my platform is very much to try to change the national conversation, to get other people, including the potential politicians who are going to win the presidency, to talk about designer babies, to talk about how is the military going to handle artificial intelligence? How are we going to handle it if Russia gets artificial intelligence first? To talk about what are we going to do with Social Security, not because we're running out of money, but because everybody is going to live to 150 and beyond over the next 20 or 30 years. These are incredibly important concepts, and very few people are addressing them. In fact, right now I'm writing an article for Vice on the idea of marriage and living indefinitely. Will people want to get married if they know their marriage is now for potentially 10,000 years? It's a lot different than, let's say, the historical average, which is like 25 or 27 years, assuming no tragedy occurs in the marriage. The whole set of structures that we have, institutional-wise, are going to be changing. And it's very important that governments and politicians start addressing them, but they're not because they're such thorny topics. We're never going to get Hillary Clinton to discuss designer babies because it's just too dangerous of a topic, and should she say something the wrong way, her entire campaign could go the wrong way.
Sure. You see that with the NRA. I mean, you see Obama tries to breach it every now and then, and now he's given up, it seems. He said, you know, you see these major tragedies, it seems obvious to do this, but you know, if you even begin to say something about the gun lobby, you're politically dead. So people don't. Is it analogous to what you're talking about?
100%. So this is the key, is because quite certain I'm not going to win, I have the luxury of being honest. And this is a true luxury in politics, that you can actually come out and say something not based on whether you're going to win or lose, but based on what you think is the truth, and using reason to determine that truth. And so I'm just trying to interject some stuff into the national conversation, and through my national columns, I'm luckily able to do that. And a lot of those ideas are catching on, not necessarily changing the way people believe, but saying, wow, there really is something different. If we do have artificial wombs to give birth in 20 years' time, which we probably will, how does that change the abortion picture? Because it actually makes the Democrats go one side and the conservatives go the other side, and it actually makes them go on opposite sides for a little bit. It's a very interesting dilemma. And here we've had a 50-year history or a 40-year history of the abortion debate. So you can see how radical technology is going to be changing politics and some of the core institutions that countries around the world have.
You know, what I find fascinating about you is, quite frankly, the media attention you're getting recently. Now, we've had guests in the past. We've had Aubrey de Grey here speaking about his ideas as far as age. You know, we've had Jason Silva here talking about singularity. But, you know, Jason gets more exposure for the brain games and less for the singularity. And for a lot of the people that come on here, they talk about their concepts, but they're not embraced. You seem to be getting embraced, whether it's Vice following you on the presidential tour, or, like I said earlier, A Good Mythical Morning, talking about you, which really opens you up to big audiences. Why do you think people are reaching out and talking about issues that a couple of years ago you might be getting no press coverage?
Well, I think there's a twofold reason. The first reason is that it's actually right now that I think a lot of people are realizing how incredibly important technology and science is. We're at a moment just in the last 2 years when transhumanism has emerged because it's actually a realistic topic to discuss. So that's one thing. And I think the second reason is has a lot to do with my past. Having been a journalist for National Geographic, and also I worked with the New York Times for a number of years as well, doing what we called New York Times Syndicate National Geographic Service articles. And it gave me, I think, a lot of credibility, because I've been with two of the top media companies as a journalist who's kind of been a stickler in facts, and it enabled me to sort of walk into a lot of these other large media companies and raise a voice and have that voice be something that could be trusted. And I think that's very important, because you're talking about concepts that are, half the people think are totally wacky, and the other half are like, is this for real? And if it is for real, it's very important. And so it's hard to convince people, but once you convince them, I think they all realize that, wow, we probably all better be talking about this stuff.
Is there any like 2 or 3 topics that you think really bring it to people's consciousness? I mean, when I think about an iPhone and the fact that people have it on their bodies at all times, that are holding against their head, when I see a movie like Her, and just see humans interacting with an OS that seems to be a human-like being, I mean, those really bring it home for me. Is it other pieces that really got people's attention more than others?
Well, everyone likes the far out concepts just from like looking at a media perspective. Artificial limbs that are tied to your brain, or exoskeleton suits, or even just, for example, driverless cars where, for example, you're not going to have any more drunk driving accidents. Those are all amazing topics. But I think the one topic that really hits people is the ones that matter to them today. And the one I speak a lot about is robotic hearts. Because heart disease runs in my own family. My father, who's still alive but has had 3 heart attacks. And I think cardiovascular disease being the #1 killer in America and around the world. So when you talk about robotic hearts, I think a lot of people listen. And they listen because it's actually something that they think, wow, if it means living an extra 20 years, it's something I might electively do at some point in the future too. And we are already having robotic hearts put in people. France has done a few of them now. And it's something that I've advocated for with my campaign, saying, for example, would I be elected president, I would, put a huge amount of money, maybe $1 billion into it, and just say, let us develop a robotic heart. Let us eliminate cardiovascular disease from the public. Because if we can do that, you can control diabetes a lot more. You can make people more active. You can make them live longer. It helps all the other organs out. There's an amazing amount of things you can do. And then it gets wacky too. You can control your robotic heart with your iPhone. So if you want to sleep, you can tone it down a little to sleep better, or meditate. Or if you want to have crazy sex, you can speed it up. The ideas of what you can do with some of these robotic organs is amazing. And I think a lot of people like that kind of topic, and it really resonates with them.
I think with heart disease, it affects people today, so it affects their life or someone they love. So I can see them latching on. I find that I need to get away from technology more these days. I find that I get so enveloped in it, and maybe it's because we broadcast everything and transfer all the knowledge on social media platforms. But I find when I actually get away and can get away from the Twitter feed and the phone, that I feel more human. And so I want to ask you, if that's the way I feel, do I really want to go somewhere where my phone is controlling my heart?
So, that is the question. And I agree with you, because sometimes I have too much of technology myself. And you can talk about it all day long, but sometimes it's just nice to sit back and look at the ocean and that's it. But I think when you actually look at the health benefits and you realize that it's not just an alternative of stepping away from it, it's really a matter of living longer. If you can guarantee yourself an extra 25 years of your life, or 30% of your life, then it becomes something very meaningful, something that one can be almost obsessive about, because it's that much more life. And I think that's really the hook of transhumanism, is that you're giving people life. You're giving them better health so they can do more things, that they can enjoy their families. They don't have to watch, think, oh, I'm dying now from some disease, and my grandchildren are just 3 or 4 years old. These are the kinds of things that transhumanism actually is doing for people. And it's one of the reasons I think it's catching on, is because everyone's starting to say, yeah, transhumanism is a good thing. It's not a religious thing. It's not even a philosophical thing. It's as one of our advisors at the Transhumanist Party said the other day, she said, it's common sense. Transhumanism is just plain common sense.
It's interesting. A lot of people say people use, religion and those kind of pieces to control people and to keep things from developing in the future. And I'm just thinking, if there isn't a transhumanist party, if it is a money-controlled or religious-controlled, government, does that keep the things you're talking about from happening? Does that keep those robotic hearts from being developed, or keep the stem cell research from happening? Or would we evolve anyways without a transhumanist party?
Well, I think the Transhumanist Party is one of the very first steps of legitimizing the transhumanist movement. Not legitimizing it in sense of a movement, but adding that political element that really has some teeth. And that's what's important. I mean, I'm not a big fan of attorneys, but you do need transhumanist attorneys so that we can present a bill of cyborg rights. We can take, when a government, for example, says no more to stem cells, we can go back there and say, but by not doing so, you're actually taking people's lives in a very literal sense. You're stopping their health, and therefore that lessens their lives, and it hurts. It hurts their families, and it hurts society, it hurts the economy. If you can prove those things, then you have a real good argument for saying that, well, transhumanist technology is always in the best interest of its people. And I think this is what's really important to me, especially when you're talking about a United States Congress is, at this moment, 100% religious. As far as I know, there's not one atheist, declared atheist, in the United States government right now.
You couldn't get elected now.
Yeah,
right?
Neither in the Supreme Court, and of course not in the presidency. So what you talk about separation of church and state, but if 100% are religious and ultimately believe in an afterlife, in some God in the sky, then of course they're controlling the science that's going out. And of course they're not pushing for the science that should be coming through the pipeline and keeping us indefinitely alive. And I also worry that with the advent of artificial intelligence, maybe we're going to have people convert artificial intelligence or something like that too, which then just propagates this entire idea of religious indoctrination again and again. I mean, I could
convert artificial intelligence into being religious?
Yes, so I've written an article about this for Gizmodo, where there are people out there that want to, once robots become smart enough, use them as pastors and use them as and teach them that the blood of Christ is the only way to get to salvation.
What's wrong with that?
Well, I think there's a lot wrong with it.
Okay.
I think it's historically...
But you want to embrace the technology, but they can't use it for their means.
It's not that they can't use it. Of course I would allow them. The Transhumanist Party welcomes religious people. But I try to say that you have to remain reasonable, because technology was developed through reason, through the kind of the rationality in our minds. So we need to stick with that. And that means you can't bring 2,000-year-old baggage just because it means something to you feeling-wise. You need to step beyond this leap of faith idea and say, well, 2 + 2 = 4. And if you can convince me of that, then that's a whole different story, something rational. But we ask that people with their faith try to be reasonable about it if they're going to bring it into the transhumanism movement.
What's it like running for president? Can you just give me a few of the nuts and bolts? Everyone wants to know. Do you get a Secret Service detail, or do you have to have a certain poll numbers? How do you fund it? Your tour bus, where is it going to be going? I'm curious more than anything.
Sure. Well, I got to be honest. It's incredibly easy to declare you're running for president. You file with the FEC, Federal Elections Commission, and it's literally can be all done online. The problem is really the financing. It's incredibly nitpicky, and there's like a 130-page booklet you got to learn, and so you don't do any of the rules wrong. Regarding financing, currently, I actually haven't been taking any money so far for my own presidential campaign. I have been directing all money so far to the party. And part of the reason is that I've been funding my own campaign, and I have enough resources to do so. I used to have a real estate business, and I sold it, and so I'm luckily able to do a lot of the campaign without reaching out to other donors so far. If I was to make a real run to try to, take votes away, it would take, hundreds of millions of dollars. So that's out of my range. Unfortunately, it's sort of I'm against the way the system is set up in America. Only the rich can ultimately win the presidency, and only through the Republican or Democratic parties. So I'm trying to make a bit of a stand by saying that I'm not going to do it their way. I'm going to do it my way, where I just use my own resources and I use my own media talents to reach out and say, hey, let's vote someone, a middle-class person that is just normal and he doesn't belong and have his hands in any pockets. There's no lobbyist influencing me whatsoever. In fact, the only thing I'm influenced in is to make people live longer and to make myself live longer. So that's been the main premise of my campaign. But our bus tour is scheduled to, hopefully we're a little bit late because we've had so much attention to the campaign that I've been a little bit overwhelmed, frankly. We had been planning to start in the middle of July. I think it's going to be pushed to the very end of July. We are buying a bus and we're going to be touring all year round. It's not just a bus tour to go to events. It's a bus tour to go to places, to protest, to start some conflicts, to cause controversy. We're going to, we have a whole set agenda of rolling up places and trying to be a bit of a nuisance, because I think the American system, to some extent, especially electing its president, is broken. And we want to make sure that our bus rolls in front of the Capitol building and we, maybe with a bunch of robots, walk up the steps of the Capitol building and deliver a cyborg Bill of Rights. And I want to make sure it's a scene. I want it to be a scene because I think what's happening is we don't have even the basics of these kinds of things in place. We don't even have the basics of the kind of designer baby technology, even though, as you probably read 2 months ago, China has now developed all the, most of the technology to do designer babies. We don't have infrastructure or legal stuff in place. I was recently interviewed and the person was writing an article on a woman who had been raped in virtual reality. And I asked, well, did she go to the authorities? And she said she did, but the authorities said, well, we don't even have legal laws defining that yet. So this is the kind of thing the Transhumanist Party and my campaign is trying to establish. We're trying to go where no one has gone before and start establishing the very basic principles of the new transhumanist age upon us. Ideas in virtual reality, cyborg rights, what does it mean to live indefinitely? Will people still end up having children if they know they're going to live 1,000 years? Maybe they won't have children for the first 500 years. Well, that will change global population. How can we make sure we use green technology to actually restore the planet back to a pristine condition? These are the kinds of things we're really trying to push. It's not Social Security, it's not taxes, it's not the other stuff, foreign policy that Hillary Clinton and Jeb Bush are talking about. We're talking about unique stuff that I think a lot of people have never heard about.
It's fascinating. And do those, say you're elected this year, next year, what would you focus on right away? Would it be those topics, cyborg Bill of Rights, these kind of things? And where does the foreign policy and the military-industrial complex and taxation come about in transhumanism?
Well, and I've increasingly developed a real comprehensive plan because I have been asked, a lot of questions like, what would you do in the first 100 days in office? To begin with, I think I probably wouldn't change that much immediately because I think it would be such a dramatic shift for the country to have somebody, a transhumanist in there with what many people consider rather crazy ideas. But I think the most important thing I would try to say is I'm here for the citizens' health. That's what I'm here for, your health. What is it that we can do to make the average citizen's health better, the average citizen to live longer? So the very first thing I would start doing is start looking at the military where we spend 20% of America's GDP and say, do we really need to spend 20% on military when we only spend 2% on science in America? That's the discrepancy. So I would like to bring that down to something like 10% on the military and 10% on science, which would be a five-fold increase for science, medicine, life extension science. Instead of a military industrial complex, how about a medical or a scientific industrial complex? I also advocate for free education, both at the pre-school level and at the college level. In fact, I am endorsing a policy of mandatory college. Part of the reason I am endorsing a policy of mandatory college is because the people that are starting to go to college today are not just going to be living to 85 like we're living. They're easily going to be living to 120. So at some point, we're going to have to raise the level of education. You can't just have, when the education standards were built in America, it was done in the 1960s when people were living 60 and 70. Now they're living to almost 90. Soon they're going to be living to 120, but education levels haven't increased. They should increase as society is
Right, because it's a bigger investment and it pays off in a longer period of time.
So these are some of the ideas I would like to push through the system. We can create an educational industrial complex too. We would have to build new colleges, build new schools, new preschools. Let every kid start school at age 2. The more education, the better for society, because we're getting to an era when robots are going to be taking most of the jobs, probably over the next 20 years. And so what are people going to do? Well, one thing I know for sure is that when people are more educated, they tend to find things to do. I'm not saying they're going to have new jobs, but maybe they'll be artists. Maybe they'll all want to do podcasts. Maybe they'll want to promote transhumanism like me. Whatever it is that they want to do, they're going to have passion and, the kind of, I think, educational background behind them to help them. And I think that's a great thing. And so, education is one of the main things we're pushing, as well as putting a huge amount more funding into medicine, science, and technology for the American citizenry's health.
Isn't healthcare already just 18% of GDP or something absolutely ridiculous, with a large part of that going in at the end of someone's life? It means, you're talking about, Obamacare has talked a lot about. We're in the UK, we don't hear it all, but is there something really wrong with the current way government treats medicine?
Yes, and when I talk about, putting money into health, I don't mean putting into healthcare. I think healthcare is sort of like Band-Aid care is what I often call it, because that's basically what a lot of the healthcare is doing, is they're not actually trying to, for example, with my father who's had 3 heart attacks and he's had, veins all over his legs, put in here in his arms and, mismatched all over, they're trying to keep him alive. And I want to eliminate the cardiovascular disease problem. That's his problem. And you can only do that with better, brand new parts. You can't just keep exchanging things and every 3 months he has a new problem and he has to go back in. So I am advocating for a system not necessarily of healthcare, but a kind of a cure care, where instead of giving Band-Aids, you actually wipe out entire problems. One of the things, it's a little bit sad that last year we went through the Ebola scare. We can easily wipe Ebola off the planet. We've already wiped huge amounts of diseases, not necessarily off the planet, but to a point when they just don't affect society as they do. Tuberculosis, there's a lot of polio, there's a lot of these things that over the last 100 years, we've done a very good job of eradicating. We need to do the same thing with other diseases like Ebola. We shouldn't have these, and SARS, we shouldn't have these things come up and go through the media and scare everyone.
You're saying we can wipe that out if we just spent 100 million or spent a concentrated effort on that?
Absolutely. I think 100 million would easily wipe out Ebola.
Ebola, really?
Yeah.
And the reason we don't is because we just don't want to dedicate the resources. We want to write all the articles and freak out about it, but that money goes somewhere else.
Yeah, it goes.
Even Bill Gates isn't getting that money ready.
Yeah, it goes to the trillions of dollars we spend on healthcare, on Band-Aid care. You know what I mean? And this is not necessarily the best way to actually move society forward. The best way is a complete revamp of the system. I call all this baggage culture because it seems like every generation just says, well, we didn't make that much progress, but let's go a little bit forward, except they're always going on top of the problems they already have and still carrying those problems with them. And sometimes you really just got to revamp the entire system and say, okay, let's sweep everything away and let's start anew. For example, the tax code, it's like, we have millions of employees working on dealing with this crazy American tax code. Instead of just having a simple flat tax, everyone pays the same thing. Please don't bother me with it anymore. Everyone does the same thing. That's what a democracy is about. Instead of a gazillion loopholes. And that may not be what Wall Street wants to hear. It may not be what a lot of even the poor people want to hear, because many of them don't pay taxes. But it's the fair thing to do. And I think a lot of people just are forgetting that we can also go back to a very fair society where everything is really straightforward. It doesn't have to be as complex as that. Like I was saying, there's a 130-page book on presidential finances. And it was part of the reason I said, I don't even want to take any money, because I can't stay within every little single rule. That takes a team of accountants to make sure you do it right. And I thought, well, a third party doesn't have a team of accountants. They barely even have a team of officers. And so again, it's so like the system's entirely stacked up, so only the very wealthiest, the 2 parties we have in America, can actually play the game. And it needs to be completely swept away and restarted from the beginning, and let leaders emerge without it being, through the hands of lobbyists. Let leaders emerge without it being based on the dollar sign. Let them emerge because they have characters to lead and charisma to lead the country forward.
One thing is for sure, you look like a president. You can't disagree with that.
Well, thank you.
Well, I mean, you're the counterculture guy, the transhumanist. Where are the dreadlocks? Where are the tattoos? Where's all that? You look like you could come out of Congress yourself.
You know what they said on Good Mythical Morning was, I look like a golfer.
I was thinking Laird Hamilton, the surfer.
Ah, yes.
So do you get asked that a lot?
Well, yeah, I do, and I get asked, what kind of pills do I do, and where are my chips? And I'm actually on one of my film projects, I'm going to get chipped on my Buffs tour. But I think what's happening is a larger amount of transhumanists are actually not as fringe as maybe it once seemed. And I'm happy to be, kind of a normal guy. I have a business. I'm married. I have kids. I change diapers. I mean, I do it all. And I'm happy to, transhumanism is becoming more mainstream, and it's like it goes all the way across the spectrum. I just recently wrote an LGBT article, the transhumanist movement and the party is very pro-LGBT. We're quite happy with the gay marriage approval by the Supreme Court. But we're all across the board. It doesn't matter where it is. In fact, we have some transhumanists who want to become fish, and that's exactly correct. But I just happen to be, someone who's just a normal guy and really just don't want to die and love technology.
Some of the hard times I have with transhumanism is I don't feel like I can dig my teeth into your platform. As in, I can't be like, okay, they believe in this, this, and this. And so, like you said, it's very broad. It feels sometimes to be too broad to me.
To watch the rest of this fascinating interview, click on the link below and go to londonrealacademy.com. There you can sign in with your social media login and watch the rest of the episode for free, along with all of our episodes on London Real, my webinars, and all of our premium content, all located over at londonrealacademy.com. So click on the link below. You'll be directed there, and you can watch the rest of this fascinating interview, and I'll see you there.
Totally century. I subscribe to quite a few libertarian myself, with some leftist, but I formed the Transhumanist Party